The number is 307 trillion. That's how much the world owes. Right now. Today. And here's the thing that should stop you cold. All the money that exists on Earth, every dollar, euro, yuan, every currency and every account adds up to somewhere around $100 trillion. So the world owes 3 times more than the world has. And yet somehow, this morning, governments opened for business. Banks processed transactions. Salaries landed in accounts. Groceries were bought. Everything ran. So here's the question that breaks everything. If everyone owes, who exactly gets paid? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the thread. And when you pull it, the whole picture of money changes shape. What you thought was a foundation starts to look like a consensus. What you thought was savings starts to look like a promise someone made to someone else, who made it to someone else, in a loop that has no beginning and no exit. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to lecture you, but because the beginning is where you find out this was always the design. The first loans weren't made in banks. They were made in fields. In ancient Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago, a farmer would borrow grain from a temple storehouse before the harvest and pay it back after, with interest. The logic was simple. Someone has more than they need right now, someone else has less, and time itself has a price. That's the original deal. It was reasonable. It was local. The debt was visible. You could count the grain. But then kings discovered something dangerous. Debt is power. Borrow enough and the people you owe become your problem, not yours. Edward III of England in the 1340s borrowed massively from the Bardi and Peruzzi banking families of Florence to fund the 100 Years' War. Then he defaulted. The banks collapsed. The lenders lost everything, and Edward III kept his throne. That was the first lesson states ever taught the financial world. When you owe a little, the bank owns you. When you owe enough, you own the bank. This lesson never went away. By the 20th century, money had evolved into something extraordinarily complex, but it still ran on a simple idea. Currencies were backed by gold. You could, in theory, walk into a bank and exchange your dollars for a fixed weight of gold. That tether, arbitrary as it sounds, was the anchor. It meant money had a ceiling. Governments couldn't print infinite dollars because they didn't have infinite gold. Debt had a physical limit. Then, in August 1971, Richard Nixon walked into the White House and cut the rope. He called it a temporary measure. He announced that the United States was suspending the convertibility of the dollar to gold. No more fixed exchange rate. No more anchor. The dollar would be worth whatever the world agreed it was worth, backed not by metal, but by trust in American institutions. By faith. That door opened onto a new and stranger world. Once money was untethered, debt could grow in ways it never could before. Governments could borrow freely. Central banks could create new money. Interest rates became policy tools, not natural consequences. The system didn't collapse immediately. In fact, for decades, it worked. But the architecture had changed in a way most people never registered. Money was now, at its core, a collective agreement. A shared fiction maintained by confidence. And the debt, freed from the anchor of gold, began to climb. Here's where it gets circular. You put money in a bank. The bank doesn't store it. It lends it out. To businesses, to mortgage holders, to the government. Your deposit becomes a bond. The government spends that bond money on roads, salaries, defense, social programs. Then, to pay the interest on what it borrowed, the government collects taxes, including taxes from your paycheck, which you earned partly because the government spent that borrowed money in the economy in the first place, which you then deposited in the bank, which then lent it back to the government. That loop isn't a conspiracy, it's the plumbing. It's how modern economies are built. And it means that when someone says, just pay off the national debt, they don't understand what they're asking for. If the US government paid off all its debt tomorrow, it would have to withdraw trillions of dollars from the economy, money that is currently sitting in pension funds, in bond portfolios, in foreign central banks. It would be like draining the blood from the circulatory system to prove you don't need it. The US government owes money to China, yes, but it also owes money to itself. The Social Security Trust Fund, the retirement savings of American workers, holds roughly $2.8 trillion in US government bonds, which means the government borrowed your retirement to fund current spending and promised to pay it back to you later with interest using future tax revenue. You are simultaneously the depositor and the creditor of your own old age. The loop eats its own tail. Japan and China both hold vast quantities of each other's debt instruments and currency reserves. They are each other's banker. They are also, depending on the week, each other's strategic adversary. The financial system doesn't care about that contradiction. It just keeps processing. But here's what that actually means when it stops working. Greece, 2010. The debt became visible. Not in charts, in people. The government announced austerity measures to satisfy international creditors, cuts to pensions, salaries, healthcare, public services. Unemployment hit 27%. Engineers and doctors and architects trained at Greek universities boarded planes to Germany, to Australia, to the United States. They didn't come back. Greece didn't just lose money, it lost a generation. The debt was restructured. The loans were renegotiated. The spreadsheets eventually balanced. But the people who left, they took their futures somewhere else. And that's a wealthy European country. In the developing world, the mechanics of debt become something closer to subjugation. Sri Lanka borrowed heavily to build infrastructure, ports, airports, highways, financed significantly by Chinese loans. When the economy collapsed in 2022, the government couldn't repay. The president fled the country after protesters stormed the presidential palace. Zambia defaulted on its external debt. Ghana suspended payments. Country after country in the global south spends more every year on interest payments to foreign creditors than it does on healthcare for its own people. This isn't metaphor, it's budget arithmetic. The Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, built with Chinese money, unable to generate enough revenue, was leased to a Chinese state company for 99 years. A port. A piece of sovereign territory. Signed away to service a debt. The financial mechanism was clean. The contract was legal. But something that looks, from the outside, a great deal like colonialism moved through the door marked loan agreement. And if this happens to small economies, what protects the large ones? The answer, for now, is size. The United States can borrow in its own currency. It can, theoretically, print the money it needs to service its debts. But that exit comes with its own price, and history has collected it before. Venezuela. The government, facing collapsing oil revenues, turned to the printing press. Bolivars flooded the economy. And then, slowly at first, and then all at once, prices responded. By 2018, inflation ran at over 1,000,000% annually. A cup of coffee that cost a few hundred bolivars in the morning cost twice that by afternoon. Families who had saved their whole lives watched those savings dissolve in weeks. Not lost to fraud, not stolen, just dissolved. The money existed. There was more of it than ever. But it meant nothing, because trust had left. Zimbabwe took the same path and reached the same destination faster. $100 trillion notes printed and spent and worthless. The government eventually abandoned its own currency and asked people to use American dollars instead. The sovereign money of a nation surrendered. And these weren't uniquely corrupt or uniquely incompetent governments. They were governments that discovered what every government now understands but rarely says aloud. There are only two exits from a debt spiral, and both of them hurt. You print money and lose the currency. Or you stop borrowing and lose the economy. The trap closes. There is no secret door. In 2008, the trap showed its teeth in the richest economy on earth. Lehman Brothers, 158 years old, filed for bankruptcy on a Monday morning in September. By Wednesday, money market funds, the places where companies keep cash to make payroll, were freezing. The entire global credit system, the mechanism by which businesses borrow for a week or a month to keep operating, seized. If governments and central banks had not intervened with unprecedented speed and scale, Ordinary workers at ordinary companies would have gone to the ATM that Friday and found it empty. Not because of fraud, because of trust. Because the confidence that makes credit flow had, for one terrifying week, evaporated. They caught it. Barely. But they caught it by doing the only thing available: more debt. Governments borrowed massively to bail out systems that had borrowed massively. The medicine and the disease had the same name. Here's what I want you to sit with. Your savings account is a promise. Your pension is a promise. It holds bonds, which are promises from governments and corporations to pay back what they borrowed. Your insurance policy is a promise. The paper in your wallet, or the number in your banking app, is a promise, maintained by the collective agreement of billions of people to treat it as real. The entire structure of modern economic life is a cathedral built from confidence. That confidence is not nothing. It is, in fact, one of the most extraordinary achievements of human civilization. The ability to coordinate around a shared fiction and use it to build hospitals, feed cities, fund science. Trust, operationalized at scale, is what separates a functioning economy from a barter system at a village market. But it is fragile in a way that the word fragile doesn't quite capture. Because it doesn't break from the outside, from some external force destroying the system. It breaks from the inside, when enough people at the same moment decide to stop believing. The question isn't who owes the money. Everyone owes the money. The question is simpler and more frightening than that. What happens the day we stop trusting each other? You'll know the answer the next time you check your balance and feel, just for a second, uncertain whether it's real.